Thanks so much, Emily, and welcome everybody. I'm so appreciative that Philanthropy California is putting this on. There's a lot that's happened in the last 100 days, as you all well know, and we have a phenomenal list of speakers here to talk with you today. So, without further ado, I am going to turn it over to Michael Gomez Daly from the California Donor Table. Michael, go ahead and introduce yourself and your organization.
Thank you, Katie. Good morning, and thank you to SCG and Philanthropy California for hosting this discussion. My name is Michael Gomez Daly. I was born and raised in the Inland Empire. For those of you not familiar with California regions, the Inland Empire is Riverside and San Bernardino counties. Geographically, it's the size of West Virginia with twice the population. I'm currently the Director of Democracy Programs at California Donor Table, which is a member-based organization with individual donors and institutions who pool their funds to make investments in communities of color so that they have the power and resources they need to, one, elect folks who represent their values and needs, and two, help govern and hold decision makers accountable. We believe that California can and must lead the nation in becoming a healthy, just place to live with shared economic success and a democracy that works for all our people. I joined California Donor Table in December of 2022. Prior to that, I was the executive director of Inland Empire United, a civic engagement coalition located in the Inland Empire. iUnited was a C4 forward organization with a C3 fund and had two ancillary political action committees to carry out appropriate partisan activities. For the visually impaired, I'm a biracial Mexican and Irish American that presents white. I have a short beard, short hair, and currently zooming in from a hotel room in Sacramento. I'm up here for a Courage California convening where they'll be launching their new Courage scorecards for the past year, and I'm very excited about that. The prompt was for us to be sharing what we've been doing the last 100 days of the new administration. It has felt like years, but I want to give the room a somber reminder that 100 days has not even occurred. It will occur on April 30th. Before I talk about what CDT has been doing, I want to just talk about the network for a moment. Our grantees have not stopped working since November 5th, the last election. For immediately post-election, 2 days after, they started ballot curing operations that went for 30 days into December 3rd. CDT raised roughly $500,000 for this effort, and it was an intensive effort that many of our grantees were learning in real time, visiting voters at their homes with the forms to fill out the forms, to scan them, send them back to the registrars. For a few things that we learned from that. One, voters did not know that their votes could be invalidated, and two, it was incredibly impactful for the canvassers. They felt like this was the most self-fulfilling part of the work that they did last cycle. We also learned that there needs to be serious legislative corrections to the laws around rejecting ballots, ignoring that the ballots were rejected to non-signature, the leftover ballots, mismatched signature ballots, were disproportionately voters of color and under 24. Our ballot matching protocols are discriminating against younger voters, and we need to fix this immediately. We all know in this room that voters under 24 feel disenfranchised from the political process, and our technologies could be exacerbating that. Beyond the folks working through Thanksgiving into early December, we've also had a slew of special elections that appeared at the beginning of the year. There's a special election in Central Valley, one in Orange County, and then less than 2 weeks, there'll be one in San Diego and Alameda in Oakland. I mentioned the San Diego one because it's left by a vacancy in Nora Vargas. Nora Vargas stepped down from her position after being elected due to external threats against her and her family. After she announced her resignation a few weeks later, the news broke that Stephen Miller, the White House chief of staff and architect of Trump's anti-immigration policies, had sent a letter to Supervisor Vargas threatening criminal liability. For those who don't know, Nora Vargas was the first immigrant to be elected to San Diego Board of Supervisors, and this letter is intentional. I give that example because we are California is being attacked from all angles. Electeds, those who govern within local governments, and including our grantees. And folks are stretched and our grantees have not had a chance to process the new world we live in. When I was asked to speak today, I was told don't be a doomsayer and must not scare the room. And I know I'm not off to a good start, but this is where I want to share how CDT has pivoted and to tell you all that you have the power and can be courageous in this face of national threats. The administration has made it clear that the plans on attacking anyone they feel is a threat, and they will bend the Constitution and laws to undermine democracy and free speech. The administration has already declared they are coming for nonprofits. In fact, many of us in this room have appeared on Lists floating around Congress. HR 9495 is waiting in limbo for the Senate to take it up, but to be clear, when it is introduced, we will need to fight like hell to make it fail. CDT has always looked at infrastructure as a strategy. How are we and our grantees utilizing various tax statuses to ensure that we are being most effective we can across those various statuses? CDT is a C4 forward organization that has an associated C3 fund, dual registered hybrid PRAC, and a California Mutual Benefit Corporation. Depending on what type of work we are funding, we will use the appropriate entity to fund that work to the highest efficiency. Since HR 9495 passed through the House, we've been speaking with our grantees about their structures. We've been strategizing with our grantees on how to be resilient in these future times. For those with C3s, we are encouraging and providing TA for them to create C4s and migrate their operations over to that. The tax status does not prohibit them from carrying out the same activities they did under the C3, but will provide protection in the case that the administration starts targeting and revoking C3s statuses of our partners. We are also talking with them about setting up redundancies across tax status. Some thought leaders have been exploring what it means to have multiple C3 funds set up in the case that some of these funds will be targeted, and others are exploring how to set up multiple C3 funds across multiple fiscal sponsors in case of these tax. Where you can be courageous in this moment is to talk with your grantees about their fiscal structures. Each of our grantees need to have legal counsel on what makes the most sense to them and their mission while ensuring that they are protected in this next phase of our democracy. Providing financial resources to a C3 to explore what it means to live with a C4 in a shared environment is okay, and we should be funding that right now. If an organization does create a C4 and move programs there, we should also become comfortable with the fact that and the understanding that a C4's primary purpose activities can also be C3 compliant activities, which means we can fund those with C3 dollars. We also need to be looking internally at our own homegrown California oligarchs and fascists who are pushing in these cities. A number of rich tech folks who came out of the Bay have been undermining our democracy left and right. Most recently, we saw recall elections happening in San Francisco and then in Alameda. And currently, there are recalls that are being launched in LA and in Contra Costa. We must call these out for what they are and be adequate in funding the network to push back against them. My information is in the chat if anyone would like to have a deeper discussion of any of these things I have covered or wants to learn more about California Donor Table and our work. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Michael. So appreciate that, and such incredible work going on with all of your grantees, and so much more to do. I'd like to turn it over to Mark. Mark, please go ahead and tell us about your organization and some of the work you've been doing.
Thank you so much, Katie. Hello, everyone. Good to be with you all. My name is Mark Philpart. I lead the California Black Freedom Fund. And for those of you who are unfamiliar, the California Black Freedom Fund began in 2020 amidst the racial reckoning when community organizers like Anthony Thigpen, Ben McBride, and Casey Patterson came together with funders like Fred Blackwell, Kathy Cha, Nicole Taylor, and so many others to really reimagine an institution that could respond to the crisis facing the Black community. And what we have always experienced in terms of philanthropy's relationship to the Black community is kind of an episodic engagement where there's a wave of support when there's a crisis, and when the news cameras turn away, the funding recedes. And so the Black Freedom Fund was born with the goal of really transforming the relationship that philanthropy has with the Black community and sustaining investment in a Black movement building ecosystem in California. Since our founding in 2020, we've invested over $40 million in over 140 organizations throughout the state. These organizations are large and small, but by and large, uh, I'd say 60% of them have budgets under $1 million. 70% of them are led by Black women. And so, our effort has really radically changed the ecosystem in California. And we know that when we make progress, our efforts can become a lightning rod. They can become the focus of attacks. And that's really the context for my conversation with all of you today. Um, the progress that we have made is very fragile. And when we began this work, we started to see in our own spaces when we began this process of really thinking about the longevity of the Freedom Fund, the impact of our work, and whether we needed to become a permanent effort beyond a 5-year initiative. We started to explore what it would take to secure our 501(c)(3) status, which was awarded last year. So we are now legally on paper as the Black Freedom Fund and will be spinning off later this year. But as we were exploring this process, we began to understand that the information that we were privy to, especially in a post SFFA world, that Students for Fair Admissions, was information that only funders had access to. And many of our community partners were just in the dark around what some of these legal decisions actually meant for their efforts. And so we started Lead for Racial Justice, which is legal education, advocacy, and defense. It's more than an acronym and really is an encouragement to the field to continue to stand pat and to continue to double down on the importance of race conscious programming. We started Lead for Racial Justice with the goal of making sure people had adequate and accurate information around the Supreme Court ruling that gutted affirmative action. And we now find ourselves, just 2 years down the road, having trained nearly 250 organizations. Um, we find ourselves in this moment where the information that we're dispensing is so very critical and being called upon by so many more, both in California and outside of the state. And we know that this training and the tools and resources that we provide are simply really one step in the process because what the administration and other allies of theirs are vying for is a return to resegregation. What we know is that their focus on really rolling back DEI is rooted in a goal of white supremacy. And so our work is not just to dispense training and information, but to build the power necessary to push back and stand for the values and morals that really typify the communities that we invest in. And so we're working hard with our community partners to stand up different efforts, which will create opportunities for the organizations we serve, and more broadly, the people who are the beneficiaries of those organizations. One such example is the Black Vision and Defense Fund, and this fund was really created immediately following the election. We knew that there would be a spike in racial animus, and we've seen this before. Many people forget that Charlottesville happened just after Trump's first administration. And we know that what is likely to happen when we think about all of the ills that our country is dealing with is that there's going to be a disproportionate burden faced by Black folks. And so we began working on this with our network partners, the Black Equity Coalition, the Black Power Network, Beat LA, the Inland Empire's Black Equity Initiative, and so many others. And what we've come up with is really this uh, program where we are providing resources and supports to organizations and really helping them think through organizational strategy, compliance, and how we build a stronger Black movement ecosystem amidst the attacks that we're all facing. Just after the election, just a day after the election, um, Black people throughout California as well as throughout the country were receiving racist text messages telling them to go back into the fields they've lost, and now it's time for them to get to work. And this kind of hatred is typical of this administration, of the cronies that align themselves with these folks. And we're fighting back to ensure that our communities are protected in this moment, and that the organizations that we support have all that they need in order to ensure that they are protected, because we know that not only will they come for organizations based on the issues that are associated with DEI, but they will also attack organizations based on their compliance with the letter of the law. And so we're doing what we can to ensure that organizations have compliance resources, as well as digital security support, and a whole host of other things that are going to be necessary for them in this moment. And then the last thing I'll say is that with all of these attacks and all of these challenges, there is a heightened state of precarity. We know that for many Black folks living in California, with the cost of living being what it is, there is a real concern about affordability, economic security, and overall well-being. These things are only heightened in times of crises. What we've seen with the federal funding freeze and job cuts, 1 in 5 Black workers in the federal government are 1 in 5 workers in the federal government are Black. And what we've seen in terms of the impact of the freeze on our communities is that for folks who are working in any sort of tangentially related field where they are dependent upon government funding in order to both deliver a service or be a beneficiary of a service, their lives are thrown into chaos. And so, with the wildfires in Los Angeles, as just an example, one of the greatest climate catastrophes of our time, we have seen that so many of the members of the Black community in the Eden Fire region, the Altadena and Pasadena area, are struggling. People are falling off of aid cliffs. People are living in vehicles. Um, Shelters are closing, and people have no hope. And for our work, it's really critical for us to advocate on their behalf, to ensure that as we are making grants to organizations in the region, they have the information that they need in order to provide critical resources to the people they serve, and that we're continuing to raise the alarm around the issues that the Black community is facing locally and nationally. And so, with that, I'll stop and just want to thank all of you for your continued support of the Black Freedom Fund, our work, and the work of our partners, and encourage you to engage and learn more about all the organizations presenting today. Thank you.
Mark, thank you so much for all your work and your partner's work during this really difficult time. I am now going to hand this over to Sylvia. Sylvia, please go ahead and tell us about the Latino Community Foundation and your role there.
Great, thank you. Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Sylvia Perez Cash, and I'm with the Latino Community Foundation. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer there. It's a new position, so you probably haven't met me, but I run all of our community investment work, both direct community investments through our grant making, indirect through our advocacy, our communications, our community engagement, our direct programming, and I also manage our strategy, both internally and externally, as we think about the next phase of growth for the foundation. I'm a proud member of our team. I work with a very passionate group of individuals who are frankly very, very dedicated to the Latino community, not just in this moment, but of course, always. Before I get started, I just want to pause. We are approaching 100 days. That's what we're here to talk about and what we've all been doing, but it's been a really heavy moment. And in those moments, I think it's really important that we invest in the time and the spaces and the sources of community that power us. At LCF, that's a real focus of what we do both internally and externally. It's a key part of what we have to do to stay present in this really difficult time. And so I would encourage you to think about that as we're listening, as we're sitting here today, frankly, in community. I can't see you, but I would love to embrace you if I could. And think about the love that's around you. Think about the power that fuels you. And think about the culture that informs you and that gives you a really unique lens onto how to solve the problems that we're facing today. At LCF is it's an organization that's fairly new in philanthropy. We have just over 10 years in our belt as a statewide foundation. We were originally started as a fund out of the Bay, always focused on Latino community, always focused on unleashing the power, the economic and civic power of Latinos throughout the state of California and now beyond. What does that mean? Well, we know that the destiny of the United States, the destiny of our future, collective future, is directly intertwined with the well-being and the future of Latinos. That Latinos represent almost 20% of our national population. We're the fastest growing racial and ethnic voting bloc in the country. And we represent a $3.6 trillion engine fueling our economy. So when you invest in Latinos, as we do, whether you're directly through philanthropic efforts or through business or what have you, you are investing in the future. You are investing in the well-being of everybody. That's why we know that this is not our work, and we can't change our work is not about DEI. Our work is frankly about equity, but we can't change what we do. And that is the thing that has really grounded us as we think about how we are facing both the last almost 2 months and upcoming this 100 days and the upcoming 4 years, that we cannot and we will not change who we are. The other thing that we've really focused on as a team is frankly alignment and making sure that we are all on the same page. There's a lot of emotions going on right now. There's a lot of ways that we all want to react. And that goes for us internally, but also us externally with our partners. Our partners are facing a lot. We fund grassroots organizations. Frankly, think very small, very close to the community, folks that are trusted organizations, not because, they are the best, most funded organizations, because they're not. Most of them are not the biggest funded organizations in the state of California, but they are the folks on the ground delivering services, who know the people that they're working with. They know the families, they know the status, they know the children, they know the issues, right? We share those lived experiences. And so we know this ground, we know these areas deeply, and we're facing an organization, we're facing an administration, we're facing we're facing a force right now that I think is important to acknowledge is not normal. Right. And I want to pick up on something that Mark said, that the progress we've made in this country around democracy and the reforms to democracy, since frankly a fight that we've been fighting since the Civil War and before, right, that progress is and has always been fragile. And we know that. And so, that hasn't changed in this moment. What we do know, though, is that the way that this administration is going about tackling the progress that we've made is not normal. And I think that's really important to state now, that inequity is something that you have to learn to see, that we are socialized in a way that suggests that people have different outcomes in life because it's natural. People have different opportunities in education because it's how the system is, right? Well, that is false. We know that is false. It's the same thing that's happening in this administration, that they are presenting their actions as normal case, normal, we're just switching out the federal government. No, we're just changing policies to align with the administration. No, what they are really doing is they are dehumanizing people. What they are really doing is breaking the laws. There's very unconstitutional acts taking place that we have to be able to recognize and see. And what to Mark's point, he took the words out of my mouth. We are dealing with an administration that is trying to recreate a white nationalist society, to take the progress that we've made back, not one step, not two steps, but centuries. And so while it is a severe moment, it is an important moment. Recognizing that moment is the first thing that we do, and also recognize the power that we have in that moment is the second thing that we need to do. And that's what we focused on at LCF, that we are prepared as an organization that is dedicated to unleashing power in communities. We have to unleash our own. And if there's one thing I could say to this group of folks in my philanthropic community, that is what I would ask all of you to do, is to think about how are you unleashing your own power, the power of your institutions to fight this moment, not just protect yourselves, but to protect the communities that we work with and we represent. So how is LCF doing that? And one of the things I would say that we've done what other people I'm sure have done, we did our due diligence, right? And we continue to do that. We're doing a risk assessment, we're dotting our I's, crossing our T's, making sure that we're not creating easy targets for an administration. But beyond that, we're thinking about really tangible ways to make a difference. And one of those ways was early on last year, in anticipation of, frankly, these policies that are coming out now, figuring out how we could how could we loosen and make available more resources for community members. Because while we didn't know exactly what the need was going to be, we knew there was going to be need. We knew our organizations were targeted. We know that our community was going to be targeted. And we wanted to make sure that we were able to not just continue the work that we've been doing, but to be responsive to the needs as they come in real time. And so in that front, as you know, all know, in the immigration space has been a huge area of attack by the Trump administration. And that is an area that we have always been advocates in. And we have really doubled down in that space, really investing in not programs, but missions, giving our partner organizations the resources they need to be the leaders that they are. Just like us, our organizations are also ready for this moment. They need reliable partners. And we are that. We are committed to being that partner, to lifting them up and to making sure that they have what they need to stretch their resources as far as possible in the way that they think is best. We're not on the ground with them, but we trust them and we know that they have the trust of their communities. The other thing that I would say is we are a public charity or a community foundation. And so one of the primary distinctions in that is that we are allowed to lobby. All of us can advocate. Right, as foundations, we all have the ability to advocate. There's lots of activities that fall under advocacy. Lobbying is only one of them. So if you aren't engaged in advocacy and you aren't funding advocacy, I would ask you to think about that too as a way to step up to this moment. It is needed. We do need to raise our collective voices. We have to meet the noise, right? And it's it's overwhelming, but we have to fill the void of silence. That is unpermissible, right? We have fought too hard to just sit back and watch this administration tear down or to attempt to tear down the things that we've been building, our partners have been building, the things that frankly the country needs to continue to build itself for the next phase of a multiracial democracy. You have to speak. And so using your advocacy lever is a source of power that we all have. As a public charity, we also have the power for lobbying very specific legislations. And so we are doing that. And we are doing that more this year. That's one of the things that we've done differently. The other thing that I would say is that we are really investing in the capacity of community spaces. We are investing in the capacity of the missions, not the program. I think I've said that already. And we're really focusing kind of where we have our extra resources, we're focusing on the most vulnerable in our communities. The immigrant community in particular is as diverse as any other, right? But there is majority are Latinos. And we know that in the administration's narrative around immigration, they are zeroed in, have a bullseye focus on dehumanizing Latinos in this country, Latinos and Latinas and Latinx folks, all of us, particularly that intersection of gender and sexuality and ethnicity. Our Latinx community is very vulnerable right now. We have aligned as a team to say when we have the ability to stretch and when we think about our most responsive resources, we are very committed to targeting those dollars to the most vulnerable within a vulnerable community. And that's something, the very nuanced perspective too, that frankly we didn't make that decision unilaterally. We talked about it as a team, say where is it that we think we can make the most difference, and where do we think we need to stand shoulder to shoulder? And it's with the most vulnerable among us. So with that, I know there's a lot to discuss, and I'm really looking forward to the Q&A, but I hope that you recognize and you're leaning into this conversation as community members. You're leaning into this conversation with your own power in place, and you're thinking about what we can do, frankly, together to make more noise than the administration itself. Thank you.
Sylvia, thank you so much for that call to action. Such incredible work that you all are doing. And I'm going to hand it over to Hannah now to talk about the work she's doing in the science space. Hannah, go ahead.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much. Happy to be here. Hannah Safford, she, her pronouns for the visually impaired. I am a white woman with short brown hair. I'm wearing a silver blazer and black blouse. I also have a somewhat uninspiring Zoom background, but that is the best my organization can do. I am a California native. I grew up in San Francisco and I earned my PhD from UC Davis. So shout out to other Aggies on the call. I was most recently the Director for Transportation and Resilience at the White House Climate Policy Office, which was established to coordinate climate policy for the Biden-Harris administration. And I now lead the Climate and Environment portfolio at the Federation of American Scientists. Briefly, FAS is a 501c3 based in DC. We work flexibly in partnership with government and with people on both sides of the political aisle to drive progress and impact across a bunch of different S&T domain areas, science and technology domain areas. That includes climate, clean energy, emerging technology, AI, and a lot more. And we do that through 3 avenues. One, we match ideas to needs by developing relationships with policymakers and feeding ideas and actionable insights up from the broad S&T community across the country. 2, we provide homes for talent, recognizing that having the right person in the right place can sometimes do more to unlock change than 100 policy memos or however many words on a page ever could. And then finally, we work with partners across the country to expand our nation's capacity to turn smart, evidence-based policy into practice. So it's ideas, talent, and capacity across a bunch of stuff that I care about, and that I'm sure folks on the call do as well. But I am here today both to provide a high-level overview of where we're at in climate and environment, and then highlight some opportunities for impact and where funders can really help drive that impact. So the overview piece, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It is a challenging time to be working on climate, clean energy, and the environment. President Trump's Day 1 executive order on unleashing American energy wrenched federal policy away from the Biden administration's goals of decarbonizing and achieving net zero emissions across the US economy by 2050. Instead, we're now seeing the enactment of an agenda that's designed to advance fossil fuels while stifling clean energy and climate advocacy. This anti-climate agenda has manifested in several ways. One, regulatory policy. So the Biden administration did a lot of work to tighten environmental standards across economic sectors, including for power plants, industry, vehicles, and much more. The Trump administration has stated its intention to roll all of these standards back. Particularly worrying in the regulatory space is the intention of the EPA to reverse its endangerment finding. This was a landmark finding from some time ago that gives federal agencies the power to regulate carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases in the same way that they regulate other pollutants. I want to note that completing these actions will take time and be subject to legal challenges. Issuing a press release is not the same thing as actively pursuing regulation or changing regulation, but it's obviously not the path that we want to go down with respect to meeting climate targets. So 1 was regulatory policy, 2 is investments. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act provided billions of dollars in financing to support climate and clean energy projects across the United States. Many of these funds, including the landmark $20 billion Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, have been frozen. Again, these funding freezes may ultimately be lifted. They're facing court challenges right now. There's a lot of remarkable organizations that are behind those court challenges, but those freezes regardless put critical projects and organizations at risk. Third is capacity. We have seen tens of thousands of federal workers in key environmental agencies been forced out or put on administrative leave. This erodes the current and long-term capacity of these agencies to deliver on their mandate to protect the environment and protect American health and well-being. And then finally, I know very close to many folks on this call, is there's just really a abhorrent targeting of advocates. The administration is threatening environmental groups and opponents of its agenda generally with criminal investigations and other tactics. This creates a chilling effect that limits the potency of the broader environmental community. So again, we're seeing this agenda, anti-climate agenda, play out in the regulatory, investment, government capacity, and advocacy, broader NGO space. And all of this is alarming, but I want to pause and remind you of three things. One, long-term trends favor clean energy. There was a report out from the International Energy Agency today that showed that the share of energy worldwide that's powered by fossil fuels is at its lowest ever. So the trends are moving in the right direction. That is powered by the economics, that is powered by what people want. It's not powered by the capricious administration. Second, Americans care about climate action and they care about having clean water and clean air. Third, there are so many ways to drive progress, and while some avenues are narrower than they were in the past, the realm of opportunity is still tremendous. I'm seeing now a lot of the shock wear off from the early days of the Trump administration, and people that I'm networked in start to come up with really creative opportunities to lead and continue to drive climate action. And so I want to go over those, a few of those just at a high level, and then happy to dive in more in the Q&A, because I think there are opportunities where California, which has long been a leader on climate action, can position itself as a leader again. So one is stabilizing climate finance. We talked about the frozen investments and other financing mechanism that's leaving a lot of projects and investments at risk of going under. But these are great projects. They're projects that have already gone through extensive vetting processes. They're shovel ready. In some cases, they are already underway. And all they need is like a little bit of additional funding to kind of get them over this uncertain period and figure out a new pathway forward. So there's a lot of energy coming from green banks, coming from funders, coming from state actors about how can we use bridge financing, revolving loan funds, and other creative financial mechanisms to help stabilize the ecosystem of climate finance and ensure that we sort of stay on the right track aligned with these longer term trends. Second is harnessing grassroots energy. So it was great to hear from LCF and others on the call about how they are thinking about really mobilizing and unleashing the power of the grassroots. And climate change can be a tremendous forcing function and focusing force. People in the US are confronting the massive threats that climate change poses on a daily basis. Disasters, when they hit, climate-fueled disasters, create opportunities for action, especially when federal government is ceding a leadership space. So post-climate disaster, one of our partners organizing resilience is thinking a lot about how you harness the energy and momentum and frankly anger when a disaster like the California wildfires hits, to funnel money and funnel resources not just into charitable support, which is important, but also the forces to change the system so it doesn't happen again. So you don't just keep putting Band-Aid under Band-Aid, but you actually are fundamentally empowering communities to make a difference. Third is elevating ideas. At FAS, we believe deeply in democratizing the policy process and making sure that policy is not just informed by a lot of think tanks talking to themselves, but bringing in ideas from broader communities. We've helped do this quite a bit in the wildfire space, and we're seeing some of that play out now in federal legislation, and would love to talk to others thinking about, man, you know, I have this community, we the practitioners, the people know what we need, but how do we get that elevated at a high level, especially when you're seeing funders like Breakthrough Energy move away from the policy space? I would encourage folks on this call to think about it as an opportunity to rush in, because there is a vacuum and an appetite for really fresh and creative ideas. And then finally, talent exchange and network building. That talent that's exiting federal agencies, it's still people that need a place to go. And there's a bunch of appetite for it across the country. And we are thinking about, how do you build efficient mechanisms and avenues to place exiting federal talent with NGOs, with state and local entities, with other organizations that can harness it to power a new era of climate innovation and ingenuity nationwide. And so I'll just wrap by, again, emphasizing that we're at an inflection point in climate and the environment. We are no longer preparing for climate change. We are figuring out how we tackle it at the same time as we cope with living with it. And we also are in an era where we can't just rely on top-down regulation to solve climate change. That didn't work. We still need regulatory levers, but we need to pair those in the context of holistic, creative, and novel approaches. In this moment, we're necessarily taking the space to step back and reflect on what happened in the past 100 days. But I'm much more interested in working with all of you to look ahead and to envision and build a more sustainable future in days and years to come.
Hannah, thank you so much for your incredible work and your support of everyone doing this work. I'm happy to say we're absolutely on time. Go team, way to go, everybody. I am going to give you a little bit of background on the California Healthcare Foundation and bring the health perspective, and then we're going to go into Q&A. So again, my name is Katie Hydorn. I'm the Director of State Health Policy at the California Healthcare Foundation. I'm based in Sacramento and have been in and around this region for over 20 years. And because Hannah called out UC Davis, I'm going to say go Ags. I've been in this area because I did my undergrad work at UC Davis. So go Ags, go UC Davis, folks. Also go Trojans, did my graduate work at USC. So I've been in and around this policy space for a long time, and so has the California Healthcare Foundation. We are a nonprofit, and we work to improve the healthcare system so that all Californians have the care that they need. We focus especially on making sure the system works for Californians with low incomes and for communities who have traditionally faced the greatest barriers to coverage. Our priorities include promoting health equity, universal coverage, data exchange, caring for people with complex needs, and the healthcare workforce. I heard a lot of those themes come out during the other speakers as well. This is really for our, you are a big philanthropy audience, so you care about this stuff. We're a nonprofit. We're a 501c4, but our bylaws require us to act as a 501c3. And I know that distinction is really important. As we've heard some of the call to actions today, I really appreciated Sylvia's comments about we have to speak during this time. And so for my foundation, we're trying to figure out the best way to speak while also not lobbying. And I know you all understand the distinction there. We do a ton of education and convening, and most of our work is funding research, like policy research with advocacy, academic, and consulting partners. As you've heard from all of our other speakers today, there's no shortage of threats to all of these different sectors, and that includes health. And while there have been no specific proposals yet, we're primarily focused on protecting the Medicaid program and all of the funding around that. As you all know, the federal government's, the Congress has directed, in the House has directed their committees to find almost $1 trillion in cuts. And you really can't do that without cutting Medicaid. So all of our work has been really trying to defend Medicaid. There are lots of opportunities for action from our perspective. Our foundation has a Defending Medi-Cal 2025 webpage, and we have lots of fact sheets. We have polling. This includes information on how many Medi-Cal members work. Work requirements are a big threat. And then it has Medi-Cal enrollment and Cover California enrollment for every California congressional district. So if you need that or your grantees need that, please take that information. If you have resources or need resources or want to share those resources with your on-the-ground grantees and advocacy partners, please feel free to share. It's there for that purpose. And if you have resources that you're putting out, please send them my way, and we can probably put them on our website as well to increase the reach. We're funding our state and federal advocacy and industry partners, as well as producing more of these educational resources. Some of the projects, we're spending a lot of time fighting back in the way that we can. And so some of the projects we're funding include the National Protect Our Care Communications campaign. You might have seen some of their ads. And we're also funding a California-based communication campaign that's sponsored by the California Pan-Ethnic Health Network and Health Access California, which are two major consumer advocacy groups in California, probably grantees of many of you. We're also funding a federal partner called United States of Care, who's working to connect hospitals and doctors and health plans, so what we would call the healthcare delivery system, with consumer advocates. We all have the same message right now, and so we're really trying to hone that and bring all of those different sectors together around to funding Medicaid. If you want more information on the California Consumer Coalition, you can Google Fight for Our Health and sign up for their listserv. They're a great source of information, and they have lots of calls to action and things that you can push out to your grantees, or if you can, that you can also participate in. And then at the federal level, we've provided a grant to and partner with Families USA, so you can Google them as well. I think I get an email from them like every day in my inbox. And their new executive director used to run Health Access California, and he is a fantastic advocate for Medicaid as well. They're both very, very active coalitions. So I'm going to keep it short. And so we have lots of time for questions. If you have questions or would like to learn more or would like to be a co-funder in this work, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. All right. And with that, I'm going to invite all the speakers, all the panelists to turn on your cameras, please. And then I'm going to invite all of the participants to put in questions in the Q&A function, and I'm going to go through and pull some questions out that we'll give to our folks here. So I've got a couple questions on IRS limits on foundation-funded lobbying. So we'll try and address that. Publicly, this first one is a really important distinction. Thank you, Sarah. Publicly supported C3s can lobby, absolutely. So if CHCS is a C4 acting as a C3, then why is CHCF trying to speak without lobbying? Sarah, wonderful question. I used to be an executive director of a nonprofit, and when I came to CHCF, I was very confused about this. So CHCF is a private foundation, and there's a distinction between a private foundation C3 and a regular nonprofit C3. Nonprofit C3s can lobby, and private foundations under IRS rules cannot lobby. And that's a really important distinction that I had to learn very quickly. And then there's one other question here on foundation-funded lobbying. Let me see here. See if I can answer it real quick. This person is sharing free courses on lobbying in the advocacy space. And so Miriam, thank you. We'll pull that link and share it in the chat. Thank you. All right, we've got some really great questions coming in here, but I'm going to start with a really broad one. What is giving you hope? I feel like each of our panelists can answer this because we all talked about all of the problems and all the things we're doing to fight back. But I would really love to hear a little bit of optimism here. So what's giving you hope? And I'm actually just going to run straight through our panel list. So Michael, I have you up first.
Folks just being courageous and innovative.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I know Mark had to step away for another commitment. So Sylvia, you're next.
Yeah, I really feel that I'm in the right place at the right moment, and that knowledge is so certain in my heart. And so I think, when I think about that, that certainty gives me hope, and that certainty is very much connected to the team that I'm a part of. There's so much passion and so much commitment to not just fighting the system, but the well-being of the people that we're working to to unleash it, for them to be able to stand up tall and without fear. And there's just so much care about people that really kind of centers me, because there's such a lack of it in our federal administration right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And Hannah.
I think again, just the creativity that we're starting to see in what I really view as a new era for climate progress. We're seeing partnerships form across organizations and sectors that I haven't previously seen. Like the insurance sector is really interested in driving climate action. That's new, and I wish that sort of we hadn't gotten to the point that we need that, but it unlocks a tremendous amount of opportunity. There's people in the tech community who are thinking about climate. Again, the trends are all moving in the right direction. So we're coming into a new era with tremendous momentum. And I think that's why you've seen such a clampdown from this administration, because they're trying to put their finger in the dike, but the forces on the other end, I'm confident are so overwhelming that that doesn't work.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. All right. What advice would you give to grantees who are nervous about seeking funding during these uncertain times? I feel like I wish Mark was here for this question, but would love to hear what each of you would say about this. Sylvia, I'm actually going to start with you this time.
Yeah, I mean, to a grantee, I would say if you don't ask, you don't receive, right? And that's the challenge. If you don't make the ask, the answer will always be no. So you have to ask. I do think that it behooves the philanthropic community, the foundations in the world, to be an open door. And I think that can feel hard to do. You know, we're all overwhelmed, we're all stretched, we're all trying to listen to everybody. But to make sure you pause and make sure you respond, even if it's just to say, hey, my next opening is quite a while out, but I received your email, I'll get back to you. I mean, the acknowledgement goes a long way. And encouraging folks, everybody's out there doing the best that they can. With nobody has enough resources to do the type of work and to make the type of reforms that we're striving for. So to acknowledge that, and to acknowledge the heart that, that what it takes, the courage that it takes to reach out to us and to respond.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Michael, I'm going to go to you next.
Yeah, what Sylvia said, but also we've been telling our folks that they need to ask for more and ask for things they're not used to. Like we really are telling folks they should, if they only have a C3,
Yeah.
ask for legal support, resources for legal support to investigate your options.
Yeah, I love the creativity. There's so much, some of the comments in here said there's so much you can do and so much that you can do to support your organization without crossing that line. Yeah, absolutely. And to the person who asked a question, there is, C3s can lobby. And so if you have questions about that, feel free to reach out to us or, reach out to your attorney because you do have a portion of what you can do. The real question is, can you use your funds to lobby? Your organization can, but there's a distinction there as well. Hannah, anything to add on that one?
Yeah, I think two. One is to the point of flexing new muscles, to be thinking with really big ideas, and if you're a smaller grantee, you may not have the capacity to do it yourself, but big ideas that require coalitions and partnerships, I think that's where there's need and appetite right now, and then kind of more tactical. Everybody is trying to figure out their strategy, funders and grantees alike, and it takes some time to pivot things. And so to the extent that you can think about the staggered ask, in the long term, we're building towards this, but in the near term, we need kind of this amount to keep us going. I think that's more viable than saying, we need $5 million now or else.
Absolutely. Thank you. All right, this one's really practical. To Katie and others, how are you handling changing or removing new non-policy aligned language? For folks receiving federal funding, there's uncertainty about how to position web copy, grants, or health studies. Are people actually removing this information? I'm happy to tell you what my organization's done. And I appreciate the question because I think this is really real and practical, not only for foundations, but also for our grantees. We did do a review of the copy on our website. We haven't changed, we have massive amounts of research on our website, and we didn't change anything that was in the past, but we did change just a couple words. We really went through with and tried to be as minimal as possible and change just a couple tiny words. And also, did go through and did that audit. In terms of for grantees, I think as folks said, we still have to ask, and you should still ask for funding. And I think there are opportunities to work through that as you're creating grants with your grantees. I'm going to go to Hannah. Hannah, any advice on that, or what has your organization been doing?
I think it depends. I mean, our organization has some federal funding, but we get funding from a lot of different sources, and so we're fortunate to be pretty heavily matrixed, so that losing federal funding is a blow, but not catastrophic. So we are sticking to our guns, and we're maintaining our DEI policies, and we're not changing any of our language. But I understand for an organization where the backbone comes from federal funding, you may be in survival mode right now and you kind of have to lose a battle in order to win the war. I would understand that.
Thank you. Sylvia, anything to add?
No, I mean, we're slightly, we can't change our name. We're not going to do that, right? And we're not going to change our mission, which also centers Latinos. And our work is about centering a very specific community for the benefit of all. But so, we are listening to ourselves a little bit to say, well, how often do we say it, right? Do we have to, shout to the bullhorn, who we are? Because it's there. If you're looking for it, it's there. You will find it. We have not changed our language, but just thinking about strategically when to use it, when it's helpful, and when it's obvious, right? And so it really doesn't help or hurt to not, not say things, but I actually feel very particular around language, and I would just say that language also is power, right? We fought for these words, we really did, right? There was a time where you couldn't say white nationalist, you couldn't say supremacy, right? And like you couldn't say, civil rights was the bad word, right? You have to remember these things. Justice was, akin to communism, which was, which in of itself is a political, thing. We fought for these words, and so while I understand kind of these, Hannah's point, lose the battle to win the war, you need to survive. The work needs to survive. But don't give up the language, find the places where you can use these words. They are important. The last thing that we can afford is to have those words reappropriated by the Trump administration and to somehow take on some other meaning and be positioned in the public narrative of the completely incorrect history and context and utilization. We don't want those words to be weaponized. They're ours. And I would just say that to everybody. I feel very strongly about that.
And I would just say to that point, I completely agree that there are phrases that are core to every organization's mission, and climate is also being censored from federal grants, but that's what I do. I do climate, and so we're not hiding that. Like, you have to own the work that you do, even if you still are thinking about how you have to marshal legal defense so that you can survive, and then sometimes pivot framing in order to be tactical. But the words and the work that are core to your mission, that's what you are.
Absolutely. Michael, anything to add?
No, other than I'm very proud to be sitting in this room with these folks, because we fortunately don't have to worry about that as CDT, given we're made up of individual donors and institutions. And I'm very glad to be working at CDT. They've been dogged, our folks have been dogged in their commitment to racial justice and keep pushing forward. But appreciate you, Sylvia and Hannah.
Yeah, absolutely appreciate you. All right, I'm getting a lot of questions about, there's several questions about foundations and our 5% minimum spending. And is there any consideration for going above and beyond that? There are a couple questions about are foundations considering this? And there was another question about it doesn't feel like foundations are doing more. And so would love to put that to the group and just maybe you could give us a little bit of insight into how your organization is thinking about this. Let's see, I'm going to go to Michael first this time.
It doesn't apply to us. We spend down our accounts every year.
Oh, that's fantastic. Wonderful. I think this actually goes to a point to, there are different ways to spend foundation money. And so love hearing that. That's very different. Our organization does look at the 5% cap. I think we currently spend at about 6.5%. We also, though, our endowment's driven by the stock market. And so when we have down stock market times, that influences what like the 5% actually equals for us. And yeah, there's absolutely a calculation where our board typically will want to lean in and we'll do sort of like a big one-time spending. Like for example, we put over $1 million into civic engagement before the election, which is sort of outside of our health funding lane, but our board felt that that was really, really important to contribute at that time. So definitely a nuanced conversation, and we're definitely thinking and listening. Let's see, Hannah, you want to go ahead? I feel like you talked about there's so much need in your space. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
On the 5% threshold,
Yeah.
I'm not sure that I
Yeah, I could actually
can speak to that.
I guess from your perspective, like are funders listening? Are they putting more money into that space? I feel
Yeah,
like you bring a different perspective than the rest of
sure.
us.
Yes, I
Yeah.
understand what you're saying. I mean, some again are running away, and in my mind, that's a bummer. And it's counterproductive, right? Because you're seeing on the one hand, people talk about a lot about where there was clearly dissatisfaction with ways that government was working, right? And that's why you were able to sort of get a long way to tear it all down, but that's not productive. And so there's a lot of talk about we need to be constructive and have new ideas and new proposals, but we've seen funders like Breakthrough step away from policy development, and we think that now's the time to go towards it and to buy, but to do it in a way, like I said earlier, that democratizes the policy process and is really bringing the voices of communities and Americans into rooms that have otherwise been closed.
Absolutely. Sylvia, anything to add?
Yeah, I would comment on, I guess, two things. One, I do think foundations are talking about it. It's just not public. I only know, frankly, maybe like a handful that have publicly said they are increasing their giving. They're all national foundations. Very, very large endowments, right? So, I mean, there's a lot of money on the table. That 5% is a threshold. It's not a maximum. And so it never is. So this moment is not the difference. This is not, it's a policy decision that the board makes, and whether they make it in this moment or they made it 10 years ago, right? I mean, or 10 years in the future, it's always on the table. There's always need. And so I think I would say that. The other thing I would say is that most foundations manage their endowments with some sort of like rolling average over a certain number of years. And so while there is interest in kind of identifying new dollars in this moment, and I would argue that a lot of foundations, if you do manage your endowment that way, you do have some bridge funding. You do have a leeway. You have a couple years where you can ride the high of the previous market returns before you really have to deal with kind of what is frankly happening, the decrease in the market right now. Like the impacts, the market volatility that we're experiencing right now does not have a direct, timely direct impact on a foundation's endowment. It will more likely impact that endowment over the next 3 to 5 years, depending on their investment policies. So, to take that in mind, if you are on the investment team on your firm and your foundation, that's something you can consider, right? You can think about what is the bridge that we have and that is a lever that you can pull in this moment. I wouldn't take that off the table, candidly. We're fairly new. We are still building our endowment. So this isn't an issue that directly applies to us. We don't pull down anything from our endowment right now. We're still building it. All of our capital comes as frankly, the relationships we have as an intermediary funder, which we're really proud of. And so, but I would say that overall, when we do have one, I would say even without that, we did intentionally look at ways to release more dollars from the pools that we do have. And we were able to increase our flexible funding by 10% this year, right? I mean, it was very intentional. And so, whether so then I guess the third thing I would say to the comment, it doesn't feel like foundations are giving a lot. I would say that it's not going to, right? There's no way that philanthropy can fill the hole that the federal government is creating. That's unpractical. And with the sector is not designed to do that either, right? The federal government is the largest scale investor in the nonprofit sector, period.
And if I could
yeah.
just
Thanks, Sylvia. Sylvia, did you have anything else to
Well,
finish?
no, I was going to say, so, I would say it may never feel that way, and so I would look for other indicators. I would think about why you feel it's not changing and think about the indicators you're using to judge that and see if you could identify some other ones. You may see something different.
Thank you. Oh, and Hannah, please go ahead.
To add real quick, there's you can talk about the dollar amount of the funding, but there's also the stability of the time frame where grantees can rely on it. Like we've recently gotten a couple of 2 and 3 year grants, and it doesn't seem like a lot, but when a lot of our grants are for 12-month periods, we can just build stuff if we know that funding, that we can rely on funding for a multi-year period. Even if we don't, we had one funder also say, look, I'm blocking you guys out for this amount of money over 4 years, and you can kind of decide how you want to use it. This is what I have. I can't promise more, but that lets us be really strategic. It lets us not waste a lot of time on thinking about the next fundraising cycle. And it also lets us leverage that money to talking to other funders who, maybe weren't thinking about coming to the table on a certain space, but they can now kick into that initial investment to really raise the ROI.
Yeah, Hannah, I just want to underscore that when I was an executive director, moving from 12-month grants to 2-year, even 18-month to 2 to 3 year grants really gave us, with a small organization, that gives you a ton of stability. And so yeah, as we're I can just tell you from personal experience, that makes a huge difference. As you said, you can actually build something rather than focusing on trying to do something quickly that we know takes a lot of time and having to write a report on it. Instead, it gives you time to really be thoughtful about the process. So absolutely, that's a really good tip, I think, for our funder audience. So we are right at 11:10. I really appreciate the conversation. And I know there were several questions we didn't get to, I'm sorry, but so appreciate all of the engagement. Huge appreciation for all of our panelists and the work that you are doing. And again, just so appreciate Philanthropy California for bringing us all together today. I'm going to turn it back over to Emily.
Thanks, Katie, and thanks, everyone. Like Katie said, there were a bunch of questions that we didn't get to. Philanthropy California has captured those so that we are able to tell kind of what's top of mind for all of you and use that to help influence our programming moving forward and everything that we're working on. So thank you all for being so engaged in this webinar. Like we mentioned at the beginning, the webinar was recorded. We'll be sending that out along with contact information for our speakers and the resources that we populated in the chat. We've also put the contact information in the chat right now if you want to grab that right away. So you'll see a follow-up email from us really soon. And again, thank you so much to our wonderful panelists of speakers and to the Philanthropy California staff helping run this program on the back end. We are really excited to see this big a group here, and please reach out to your regional association or to Philanthropy California if you're interested in getting involved in more of this work. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.